conflict resolution. Okay. I might also add, he's a great son, a great husband, and a great father. So if you'll mute yourselves, and we'll take questions and answers at the end.
Thank you, Mom. Gosh, I think I'm just going to stop right there. Any questions? That's as nice of an introduction as I think I will ever receive at any event. My mom asked me to do this presentation, and I was really looking forward to it. I do a lot of presentations on this subject throughout the state bar and different organizations. And again, as you mentioned, as an adjunct at St. Mary's University. But this is the ideal group to do this presentation for. And the reason I say that is I've sort of been following along in the background, listening to my mom tell me about activities and programs and things that this group does, and looking through sort of this list of people that are here today. I see a lot of incredibly active individuals here in terms of making community difference, okay? There's a lot of people here that participate in voter registration programs, policy issues, who write editorials, and who really take a strong position and speak their mind on important issues. And that's a lot of what we talk about today, is how important it is to actually do that, to speak our mind and to share this information with people, even in the times and situations where maybe that's not as popular as it once used to be. Just really quickly, and you don't even have to raise your hand, because I already know how many of you in the last year have found yourself in a conflict online, talking to somebody, perhaps a friend, a family member, a stranger, over an issue, a policy issue, a political issue, things of that nature. It seems to happen a lot these days, and the discussion that takes place in the media, especially recently, suggests that we are at a breaking point, that we have become more divisive, more argumentative, and more divided than at any other time in history. I'm not sure that's exactly true. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in my presentation. But if that is true, the fact is that we have now gotten to a situation where people are taking very strong positions on issues and finding it difficult to communicate with each other. I think it's time to ask the question, what can we do to reopen those lines of communication? Because we really only have two options. We either talk to each other or we completely separate and isolate ourselves. And I really hope that we don't end up in the latter. So I'm going to share my screen at this time. Hopefully everybody can see my slideshow over here, and we'll sort of walk through this together. Can everybody see that okay? All right. So we're going to talk about these issues, like I said, over here. I love this quote over here. I always start my presentations with this. The world's full of about 7.4 billion people at this point in time. And that means there are 7.4 billion different opinions, ideas, convictions, beliefs, and traditions out there. It is normal. It really is normal that we disagree on a lot of things. I know sometimes we feel that, how could it be that, you know, I used to have such a great relationship with so-and-so, and now because of their views on X or Y or Z, I feel like I just can't talk to them anymore. It would be really unusual if you agreed with that person on every single issue. Statistically, the odds are against it. It really is normal, like I said, that we should have all these different opinions. The question is, though, or the issue is, we need to figure out a way to communicate, cooperate, and coexist amongst all these opinions, amongst all these different issues. So that's what our focus is going to be today, looking through that. I pulled up a few pictures over here to remind everyone that conflict that we're seeing over the last year, last 3 years, going back maybe even the last 8 years, depending on what you're feeling and what your position is not new. Okay. Historically, the United States, and going back even further in history, the United States was built on conflict. Okay. Federalists and anti-federalists. Should we secede from England or not? And then once we did, how do we combine our 13 colonies into one working union? We've had a civil war in this country. We've had a number of issues and debates that have come up historically. And I would even venture to say that as much as it feels that we are now in some sort of inevitable path of ongoing conflict, the idea of whether or not a person should wear a mask, whether or not someone should get a vaccination, when you compare that to some of the other issues that we've dealt with in our country, state rights, slavery, civil rights, they really do pale in comparison. And so I start with this slide over here to basically create the mood to say, you know what, there's hope. Okay. As a country, as a society, as a community, if we were able to get through those issues, then there's no reason that we can't continue to find some sort of ground in which to work, in which to be able to talk to each other, in which to open up lines of communication. Okay. Now, as I said, or as we've talked about, there definitely feels like there is more conflict that exists today. And so I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about why it feels that way. Okay. The first reason seems to be counterintuitive. Okay. The fact that we have increased access to information actually should suggest that we have more knowledge, more information at our fingertips, and therefore would tend to limit or restrict the amount of conflict we have. But it really doesn't work that way. See, even going back just a few, generation ago, a couple generations ago, all of us got essentially our information, our sources of news from single sources, or maybe even a few sources. But those sources had one thing in common, which was they provided the same identifiable information. Maybe there was a slight leaning to the left, maybe a slight leaning to the right. But generally, if you flipped on any one of the three news channels that existed at that time, or if you looked at any of the series of encyclopedias or magazines that were available at the time, unless you went into the editorial sections, everybody was reporting pretty much the same information and presenting pretty much the same opinions. Okay. Now, again, from a historical perspective, not always the case. Okay. There have definitely been papers and documents going, beyond and far back before the Magna Carta that provided and presented different opinions of where we should be as a society, where we should be as a community, different ideas of thought. But that information was not as easily readily available as it is today. Today, you take your pick at any moment of the day through internet, through social media. There are just literally billions of sources of information. And each of those sources of information gives a very different direction of what they believe to be right and what they believe to be wrong. Okay? And so, depending on where you get your source of information from, it's going to influence and impact the way that you think, the way you process, and the positions and beliefs that you have. Okay? And so the question comes up, of course, well, why don't we just get our information from all these sources of information? Why don't we look to multiple sources? In a minute, we're going to talk about why we don't do that. We simply cannot take in that amount of information. What we do is we select information that we hear. And then once we hear it, once we believe it, we then go around reinforcing it and affirming it with information that agrees with what we already believe. NPR did a great article just this past week, and I've given you the link in the site to that here. And I'm going to make sure that this presentation is available to everyone. If you want to go back and just sort of look at this, thumb through it later on and process some of this information some more. But there's a migration that is taking place in this country right now, and it's not based on weather, it's not based on job opportunity, it's based on fundamental thought and philosophy. And we are seeing people moving from state to state or city to city, region to region, based upon finding people that think and act and believe the same things that they do, okay? And so what happens is, anytime we get a thought, we get an idea, it ends up being reinforced. And we only listen to the ideas that agree with us. And when we hear ideas that don't agree with us, we tend to dismiss them right away. And that's, at least in one part, where our conflict comes from, okay? I'm not saying that the other side is right and that you're wrong, or that we're always right and they're always wrong. The fact of the matter is, everybody thinks they're right from their source. And when you think that and you don't listen to what the other side has to say, it prevents us from having conversation. So here's what I'd like to do for the next 45 minutes or so. And I'm going to encourage everybody, you know, as you have questions, because I'm looking at the PowerPoint screen over here, I don't see the chat going on or people raising their hands. It doesn't bother me at all. If you have a question or a comment about what we're looking at that moment, go ahead and turn your mic on and ask right then and there. Don't worry about saving it to the end. I like to see these conversations tend to do better, honestly, when everybody's engaged in sharing their information. After all, that's what I just said. We need a bunch of different opinions from many people, okay? But here's what I'd like to talk about. I want to talk about how we develop our own positions and our own objectives, how we understand arguments, okay, and beliefs, what it is that the other side believes and where they get that information from, how to listen to the other side without immediately spiraling into conflict, okay? How to present your position in a way that there can be a productive conversation, not only so that you're not the better person simply acknowledging and listening to what they have to say without cutting them off or refuting them, but truly be able to present your beliefs, ideas in a way, in a manner that the other side will actually listen to what you have to say. And then finally, a little bit of time talking about what to do when you feel the other side has stopped listening to you and started personal attacks, reporting the negative, and has cycled into these patterns that we see now of cyber trolling or you know, disinformed conversation. Okay, so we're going to look at two things over here when we talk about positions and objectives. Okay, the first thing is really, what is it that I believe? Okay, because in order to have a good conversation with somebody, it is absolutely imperative that you understand what it is you're talking about. And from that, I don't mean that you have to, again, be knowledgeable about every single factor, every single idea, but at least you know why it is that you think something, or what is your support for what it is that you're arguing. And then we're going to talk about when it is important to, or why it's important to engage people, and when it's important to not engage people, when it's time to simply avoid that person. So a little bit of information over here. First studies involving, and we're going to get scientific just for a couple minutes, I promise, and then we're going to leave this, okay? The first studies that really focused on how the brain processes, understands, and receives information from a purely scientific view began in the 1940s. There was a scientist by the name of Claude Shannon. It's actually a mathematician. And Mr. Shannon published his papers that basically showed electrical pulses working through the nervous system. It's the first time they had the technology actually to measure these and be able to identify what those electrical pulses were, okay? Those pulses translate into bits of information that we receive every single second. Every time we get one of those flashes, every time we get one of those electrical pulses, we're receiving some sort of information. Some of it's automatic. We're thinking about the weather, we're thinking about touch, we're sensing our smell, we're listening to what's being said. What they were able to calculate, and they've been able to verify since then, is that the human brain receives about 11 million bits of information per second. The body transmits 11 million bits of information to the brain for processing. And again, through measurements and through studies, we've come to realize that the brain doesn't have the ability to actually process that amount of information. In fact, the amount of information that we generally can process is about 50 bits per second. So that's a staggering difference between the amount of information that is coming in and the amount of information that we actually understand and what's going on within our system, okay? And so what happens when too much information is coming in, okay? Well, again, the brain can't process all of it, and we don't want to be absolutely paralyzed from making any decision, doing anything, saying anything. And so we rely on mental shortcuts, okay? And if everybody will turn on their mic for 1 second, I'll give you a very quick example of what one of these mental shortcuts looks like, okay? We're going to play just a real quick game. We're going to keep the beat over here going, if you will, please. 1 + 1 is?
2.
2.
2 + 2 is?
4.
4 + 4 is?
8.
8 + 9 is?
16.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so those of you that immediately said 16, we're using a heuristic, which is summarization. We assume that the next thing is going to follow a pattern, okay? Those of you who paused used a different heuristic. You're still using a heuristic, which was pattern solving. I was listening to a pattern and something broke the pattern, which caused my mind automatically to pause and ponder what the next step is. So that's how our brain uses shortcuts to figure out what's going on, okay? And we use these all the time, okay? We sort out relevant facts. For example, I know that my computer's running slow for the last few days. And so when it came time to join this Zoom, I knew that I had a responsibility to be present. I'd already set a mental alarm clock in my mind that said, you know what, 15 minutes earlier, I'm going to jump on just in case I run into any problems over here.
I need someone who sees the world from a different lens.
We use representative replacement. In other words, things that have worked in the past, we go ahead and repeat.
Hold on, Rob. Hold on.
Yeah.
Can you guys please, somebody is not muted. We're hearing your. Yeah, thank you.
There we go. Yeah, I apologize. That's on me. I told everybody to unmute, and I should, I guess, put everybody back on mute. We use representative replacement, knowing that, you know, in the past, I've had a glass of water, cold glass of water to hydrate and to refresh me, so that the next time I go out for a walk and I go to the fridge, I don't think to myself, should I have a warm glass of milk right now, or should I have a cold glass of water? We instinctively have taught ourselves, it's the cold water that's going to refresh us, that's going to make us feel better. And we even use heuristics to influence our emotions in our feelings. I'm feeling good about myself right now. I'm feeling very positive. My mother did an introduction that said nice things about me and made me feel good. I didn't have time in the last few minutes to thoroughly process every comment she's said, to verify whether or not it's true. When she says that I'm a good son, to think back at the literally 100,000 things that I've probably done in the last 6 months that could be measured and put into a category: good son, bad son, neutral son. I just took that statement at face value, and it caused me to feel positive about myself. So those are heuristics. Those are how we basically get through the day. We otherwise would absolutely be paralyzed with fear again, like I said, because we simply can't process all the information that comes up to us. So heuristics are incredibly important, but just like any shortcut, they have flaws to them, okay? Anytime we use a shortcut, that means that our information is incomplete and not fully processed. Whenever we end up having a opinion that is created through a heuristic, that usually is done in a prism of what we call either internal or cognitive bias, okay? And again, quick example for that, My wife wants me to go with her on a trip to the beach, okay? And I am compromising and going with her on a trip to the beach, but I don't want to go on that trip. And the reason is I know if we go on that trip, she's going to go into the water. And I know in my head that if she goes into the water, she's going to be eaten by a great white shark. Does that make sense? Absolutely not. Okay. But in my mind, I've created this cognitive bias. It comes from all the things that I've experienced in my life, ranging from the fact that I saw Jaws at the wrong age and time to see that movie, all the way through my other previous experiences in dealing with the ocean, such as on my senior trip, being stung by a stingray in the ocean. I have not had positive experiences going into the ocean water. And so anytime I think about the ocean, I have a negative reaction to that. That is a cognitive bias. Statistically, it doesn't make sense. The odds of being eaten by a shark are minuscule, okay? But there's a reason that if we're in Vegas playing cards and I win 3 hands in a row, that I think I'm on a hot streak, okay? And that I can't lose going forward. There are reasons that if somebody pulls out Brussels sprouts at the dinner table, that you're going to have that reaction, or maybe it's a pleasant reaction. All of those come from our previous experiences with those items, and we use those previous experiences to create our heuristics, to shortcut our information processing, and we come up with answers and solutions that sometimes aren't 100% accurate. It's what we believe, it's what we think, but it comes from a particular source, okay? So, first tip, there's absolutely nothing, no shame that exists in recognizing that we misunderstood something, okay? That we processed something wrong. At some point in time, I can admit to you readily that I know the likelihood of my wife being eaten by a shark in Port Aransas is very, very minuscule. Doesn't mean that I'm not still scared about that, worried about that, or thinking about it. But I can acknowledge that there's so much information in the world, I've not had a chance to process all of it, and that we do our best, okay? Now, if I'm going to recognize that for myself, I'm also going to suggest that you recognize that for others. That when people present arguments and positions, that they're thinking from their reality, from their internal bias, and from their heuristics, and that they're not necessarily bad people or evil people or wrong people even. It's simply the information that they understand, okay? So there are certain ways that we can overcome cognitive biases. Like I said, I can recognize and admit I'm wrong in terms of my thoughts about the ocean and the shark. Here are just a few real quick tools that you can use in any given moment. The easiest one is simply to slow down. The quicker we make decisions, the more we make decisions under pressure, the more we rely on heuristics, the more we have the opportunity for cognitive bias to take place, okay? Number 2, identify the goal, all right? Sometimes, instead of looking at what's in our best interest and our best interest alone, let's look and see what else is out there, what might benefit everybody. Take some time to process your emotions. Recognize that emotions do drive a lot of what we do, and don't be worried or afraid of that. It's okay. That's what makes us human, okay? It's important that as you start to figure out what it is that you think, what it is that you believe, and to not let these objective biases take over everything, that you remain informed, okay? And where you get that information from is going to be very impactful. The original title of this presentation, I know I've started talking about sort of American politics, but this applies on an international level. The original discussion was, how do we talk about and reach some sort of conflict resolution for the Mid-East peace conflict, the Mid-East conflict? Obviously a very simple, very easy task, okay? It's one of those things that has been challenging us literally for centuries, okay? But I have a position, I have a belief of where I stand on the Israeli-Palestinian dispute. And I'm sure everybody else does as well. It's important to know where that decision, where that opinion came from, why it is that you believe that. There we go. Sorry. My slides went, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of some things that you can do to help enhance your background for this position, this issue. Make a list. Actually make a list of all the issues that need to be addressed in a particular issue. And again, this isn't something that you have to do every single day. If somebody asks you, where do you want to go to lunch? I'm not suggesting that you go through this thorough of a process to determine and examine your answer there. But on issues involving political positions where you may be speaking, where you may be writing, where your opinion is going to be representative of a community, and where you are going to be advocating for a particular view or particular candidate, it's good to know more information about that. So for example, on the positions with regard to your beliefs in Israel, what is your belief with regard to the claim of the property? Is it based on history? Is it based on military occupation? Is it a biblical basis? What's your position on Jerusalem? Do you believe in a two-state solution? Do you believe that Israel should negotiate with who? Okay, all of these different issues are things that are going to directly impact and influence our position on this issue. So do your homework, do your research, think about the questions that may potentially come up in discussing this issue, and decide, figure out where it is that you think the answer should be, where the problems are and what should exist. All right, switching gears just a little bit. Now that we work through what it is that we are trying to, or what it is that we believe, the next step comes in discussing how we're going to present that and what it is that we are trying to accomplish. Okay, there's a famous test called Thomas Kilmann, and they measure modes of conflict. And essentially what they're trying to decide is how it is that people go around addressing and dealing with conflict in front of that. And it's based upon levels of assertiveness and levels of cooperativeness. And basically, we find ourselves in one of 5 different categories. We find ourselves either as being competitive, compromising, collaborative, accommodating, or avoiding. Okay? Now, each of those has a different definition to it and has different characteristics that go through it. And I won't read this entire slide over here. I will let you guys do that at your own time if you have interest over here. But certainly understand that if you are trying to work through a conflict and you are somebody who is competitive, where there has to be a winner to the contest, and you are trying to negotiate with somebody else who is also competitive, you're going to find yourself at a bit of a standstill. Okay, there's a Dr. Seuss book out there called the Zacks, and it's a real quick story of a northbound Zacks and a southbound Zacks meeting in the middle, and simply one side refusing to go one step to the left, one side refusing to go one step to the right, and so they can no longer go forward. They're blocking each other's path. Okay, there are definitely other ways to resolve conflict other than doing that. Okay, let me run you through an example over here. Your spouse, significant other says, what do you want to do this weekend? Now, personally, I'm hoping to stay home, especially once I hear about the weather. I'm going to relax. I want to watch some TV. But before I get that answer out, my wife says, I'm thinking we should make plans with the Andersons for Saturday night. I want to go out to dinner with them and I want to go dancing. How is it I'm going to respond to this? Okay, well, the first thing I need to figure out is, where's my conflict value on this?
Rob, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there is a logical answer to that, and it is yes, dear. Sorry, I had to throw that in there.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And that, if I were to actually identify terms that works with, would be in a perfect example of accommodating. Okay. And it would be in a situation where, regardless of how I feel on the value or on the conflict, my answer is yes, dear. I've learned very quickly, happy wife, happy life. I understand that 100%. Okay. Unless, of course, I absolutely hate the Andersons. And even though that's what she wants to do, There is no way in hell, pardon my language, that I'm going to spend my Saturday night with them. Okay? So first thing I need to do is measure where's my value and conflict on this issue. To put it another way, if I'm walking in a parking lot and I see that somebody has dropped a wallet, what am I going to do with that wallet? I'm going to pick it up. Hopefully, I'm going to do one of a couple things. I'm going to look in there, see if I can identify the owner. I'm going to give it to that person. I'm going to track down that person, or I'm going to turn it into the police, the lost and found, somewhere where somebody else has an opportunity to get that wallet. Now, same situation. I'm walking through the parking lot and I see that somebody's dropped a quarter. What am I going to do with that quarter? Okay. Now, in theory, my answer should be the same. I should either do some sort of fingerprint test to determine the owner of that and track it down and give that quarter back, or I should take that quarter over to the lost and found and have somebody claim it. I'm not going to do that. And it's not because my morals have changed or my ethical decisions have been hampered in any way. It's simply that it's not worth the effort to go through all of that simply for a quarter. So we have to measure and figure out where our conflict value is. How important is it in terms of me making plans and deciding what we do Saturday night? Then, based on that, I can then look at what is going to be my approach to dealing with this conflict. And it may be something such as a competitive nature, which is you chose what we did last weekend. It's my turn to decide what we do this weekend. You chose for us to go for Italian food last Friday. I'm choosing to go for Chinese. It's my turn to win. Okay. It may be accommodating, like we just talked about. The proper answer, like you said, is yes, dear. Actually, the proper answer is yes, dear. I want to do whatever you'd like to do to spend time with you. That is the actual full correct answer to that question. But that's an example of accommodating. What if I don't want to go dancing? Maybe I can look for some sort of a collaborative response. You know, look, I know you like to dance, and I know you want to have plans this weekend. Let's start talking about other things that we can do that are social and involve the things that you like to do without putting me in the uncomfortable position of having to dance. Maybe we'll go to a show together. Maybe we'll go to dinner only, wine tasting, artwork, whatever it might be, okay? But all of these are examples of how we approach conflict and how we deal with that situation, okay? Now, this is where we're going to get into actually communicating with other parties and deciding how we're going to communicate with them. Now that we know that we have different ways to approach conflict, and that conflict a lot of times is based upon our simple understanding of a fact that is influenced by what we believe versus somebody having a fact that they believe that's influenced on what they believe, how are we going to communicate with each other, okay? The first thing we have to do is we need to separate out conflict cognitive bias or logical fallacy, okay? Logical fallacy is illogical thought. And I'm going to tell you right now, the most expert people in this subject matter don't have a way to communicate with people who have the logical thought. It simply cannot be done, okay? And here's what I mean by that. If you look at this quote by Noam Chomsky over here, we're all moved by injustice and discrimination. We are all inside concerned human beings. We want to give more than we can receive. You can read through the rest of the quote at the end. It talks about wanting joy, love, and laughter, okay? So if we look at a subject such as gun control, which I'm going to use as the example to go through some of these problems over here, there's a difference between somebody who has a cognitive bias that believes that protection of the Second Amendment is important for the common human purpose of protecting and saving life and protecting, creating safety, versus somebody who believes limiting and restricting gun ownership is important for those same purposes. Those people can communicate with each other. The person that you cannot communicate with is the person who has already gone to the grounds of conspiracy, saying the world's going to collapse, the government's out to get me, I cannot trust anybody in the community. Any attempt to limit my gun ownership is an imminent threat to me and my family. I need to acquire and accumulate as many guns as possible. And by the way, I love this picture. This is actually somebody's basement. You imagine the ownership of weapons here, the investment here. Trying to communicate with a person who has gone that far off in as far as their processing, to not look at accomplishing goals through a common good, a community benefit, is someone that you can't communicate with, okay? So in that situation, when you have people like that, we're going to talk about how we choose to defend instead, okay? I've got these charts over here. If you look through polls that have been done, okay, on the issue of gun control legislation, what you're going to find is what most of us already knew, that the majority of us are centrists, okay? Perhaps we're leaning left centrist, perhaps we're leaning right centrist, but we have a central position. The individuals that we consider to be extremists actually make up a very small percentage of the population. The problem is, based upon the information that we receive, what we hear, and what we know, is that our perceptions are different, okay? In other words, if I get all my sources, yes, ma'am.
I have a question about that, because it seems
Sure.
to me that if you're correct, and I think I agree with you that most of us are centrist, how do the people in the extremes control what happens?
That's a fantastic question. And that's exactly where we're going to go right now. Because as you see, the next two slides over here, as opposed to where people really are, or what we believe people to really be, we take a look at where we lean. If we lean slightly left, okay, we think that that is a reasonable and rational position, and everything that we've heard to enforce that teaches us that. And we then actually assume that the majority of people that are against us are not in that moderate standpoint. They're actually in an extremist standpoint, okay? That's how we get into these issues of anybody who does not support gun control is militant, is an NRA supporter, is you know, a gun hoarder and collector. And the same thing happens on both sides, okay? Anybody who slightly leans on the right that perhaps would be receptive to gun background checks or restrictions of certain weapons, but doesn't want to give up their Second Amendment rights, believes that their position is actually right, and they believe that anybody who disagrees with their position is not a centrist, but rather is a socialist willing to sacrifice all individual rights, okay? So based on our own cognitive biases, we believe that the other side is extreme. Why is that? Again, because we take our own personal experiences to assume that our position is logical and therefore anything against it is not. And the main reason comes from what the problem is that we're seeing right now is enforcement. I'm going to come over here for 1 second. All right, I don't want to get too far out of my order of slides. I'm going to come back to that because I'm going to give an example of where social media and responses and news channels and other forms where we receive and process information have started to create these misunderstandings. We are taught on certain news channels that anybody that is right-leaning who supports a certain candidate is an extreme right-leaning person. And we're taught on certain news channels that anybody who doesn't agree with that particular position is an extreme left-leaning individual. And to hear that message repeated over and over and over again, we start to assume that to be correct. We put that as part of our cognitive bias. And when we're doing our shortcut answers, that's what we automatically come to. That's what we automatically assume. Okay. So again, and this is just a summary of what I had mentioned before, you can have conversation, very good conversation with somebody who disagrees with you, okay, as long as they are still in line with logical thinking and have a process to it, okay? So in this example over here, I believe in constitutional carry. The reason? Because I want my family and myself to be safe. I believe gun ownership should be limited. Why? Because I want my family and myself to be safe. We have the same underlying current there. We have the same underlying reason. And once you can establish that the parties have that reasoning behind them, now it's time to open up conversation. Really quickly, the people that don't, when you're dealing with illogical fallacy, there we go. And we deal with this certainly as an organization like NCJW from a policy position whenever we're writing editorials, whenever we're speaking on behalf of an organization. If we're dealing with people who have illogical positions, and again, recent example, we had some horrible anti-Semitic statements that were being made and being passed along right outside the JCC recently in the last few months. And those same pamphlets, that same material found its way into several neighborhoods. I am not suggesting that we engage in discussion with individuals like that because their thought process comes from an irrational point of view, okay? So in that situation, what we need to do is we need to defend, okay? When we write our editorials, when we respond on the news, when we advocate against those individuals, we're not communicating to them, okay? What we are doing is we're communicating to other people, to third parties, okay? So that when they see information given by that group and organization and information from us, that they can process that and come up with their own determination, hopefully in support of rationality, okay? But again, I want to make sure I'm not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that we engage in, direct negotiations or communication, productive communication with illogical processors and terrorists. Okay. All right.
Okay, Rob,
So,
can I jump
yes.
in? This is Dana Howe. And
Hey,
thank
Dan.
you for this. This is fantastic. So I would posit that, if you talk about the issue of what you call gun control, and I'd call, gun safety, the real root of the problem isn't, you drew a perfect example of everyone wants to keep their family and children safe. Perfect. But I think deeper, the root of the problem is we can't even agree on what the Second Amendment is anymore. What does the meaning of what does defending the Second Amendment actually mean? That's up for grabs. Nobody has actually agreed to define it in recent history, or maybe in contemporary history, I should say. And the same goes for Roe v. Wade, and the same goes for mask wearing. I mean, the left and the right were divergent, and anyone who read the New York Times knows that they were both wrong on the extremes. The left was way too scared, even though they were vaccinated, and the right was way too not scared and not vaccinated, and there was not enough of the rational middle. So what I hear you suggesting is that in some of these cases, we shouldn't even try to negotiate. It becomes a communication war, and who can rally their troops more. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I'm hoping, I think my answer to that's going to be in the next upcoming slides is, first of all, the conversation, like you said, needs to change, okay? I'm going to do an example in a few minutes, hopefully, about subjective versus objective communication. Like you just pointed out, I think I want my family to be safe. Well, you're not going to persuade me what safe means. That's a subjective thought, okay? So we need to turn to objective thoughts. We need to look at statistics. We need to look at facts. We need to have an actual discussion, interpretation, like you said, of the Second Amendment. What exactly does that mean? And start breaking down there. If we can find common ground there, now we can start to explore our own feelings and see if you can reach some sort of compromise or agreement that still satisfies that interest of safety and the other side's interest of safety as far as policy creating. See, this conversation talks about both one-on-one conversations that you're having as well as policy issues. But I agree with you 100% that we've spent so little time looking at the actual root of where our problems are. Let me walk you through a couple of these really quickly, because I don't want to keep you guys too late this afternoon, and hopefully get back to the point that you just brought up, okay? I think it is incredibly important that we explore and build rapport with people, with the other side. If you have lost a family member as a contact, as a friend on social media, if you have lost a friend over a political issue like this, like we've discussed up to now, I think it's time that everybody look themselves in the mirror and consider, what is that friendship and that relationship based upon, okay? If it really is defined by that one issue and that one issue alone, then maybe it wasn't a good relationship in the first place. But if there were other bases for your relationship, I have a friend from going all the way back to elementary school, okay? And he is as right of QAnon as you can get. He is an extreme conspiracy theorist. What we have realized is we don't talk about those issues. And it's not that I'm trying to avoid that with him. I just recognize that I cannot engage with that person like you just brought up. That doesn't mean I want to destroy the relationship. We've got plenty of other things that we can talk about, and we manage to do so. We talk about travel, we talk about family, we talk about sports. You know, there are other things that we can talk about and where we can find common ground. Even the extremists, I tell people, even the people that you disagree with the most, have something in common with you. Perhaps it's their love of pets. Perhaps it's their love of science fiction movies. Perhaps it's their love of chocolate chip cookies. Whatever it is, find something on which you can build your relationship. Because the moment that we start to think that we have nothing in common with the other side is the moment we start to demonize them, and we therefore treat them subhuman, and we therefore avoid coming up with any reason to have conversation with them. Okay, so look for ways to do that. I already mentioned this a moment ago with Ocean. I want to make sure that when you're having conversation with people, and I think this is the point that you were just bringing up, the word safe, keeping my family safe, means very different things to many different people. Okay, we need to protect our citizens first. The easiest way to overcome that issue is to ask questions. Okay, why is it that you feel gun ownership is going to cause you to feel safe? Okay, is it because you think that the bad guys, quote unquote, have guns and you need that to defend yourself? Is it because you think that guns work as a deterrent? Is it because it creates a confidence in you? You know, what is it that makes ownership of that weapon create safety? Because then we can start to dissect and particularize certain items. Again, somebody who might perhaps say, I want to have weaponry, I want to have an arm so that if somebody breaks into my house that I can protect my family. Is probably somebody who's actually going to agree on a couple issues that you might not automatically assume, such as, do you need to have a gun that shoots off more than 25 rounds per minute? How many people are breaking into your house? Okay. Or if you want good people to own guns and bad people not to own guns, where is your position on background checks, things of that nature? Okay. And the same thing if we go to the right of this. Again, I want to pop through this rather quickly because I see that we're getting close to the end of time, and I knew I had 60 slides and 50 minutes in which to do this, so I knew we weren't going to get to everything. But I just wanted to remind everyone, you know, when you hear the word ocean, there's all sorts of different thoughts that come up to your mind, again, based upon your experiences, based upon what has happened to you in the past, based on what you've seen and heard in the news, on the media, on TV, and what people have related to you. And so depending on what your thought is about ocean is going to impact and affect what your thought is about dealing with the issue of ocean. Okay. All right. This is where we're just cutting off, or we're just talking over here. I use the movie example, but you'll see how this applies to gun control. If I ask somebody what their favorite movie is, I'm not going to be able to engage in a debate with them. And here's why. If I say my favorite movie is The Princess Bride, I love the story behind that. Okay. It has deep meaning. Nobody's going to be able to convince me and persuade to me of the fact that that movie is not a good love story, or that it doesn't have deep meaning. That's what I believe. It's what I feel. It's internal to me. So what we need to do sometimes is actually rephrase the question. Get off of the issue of safety. Get off the issue of individual freedom, and get back to the law. Get back to the statute. Get back to the objective criteria. Okay. So when it comes to movies, instead of asking the question, what is your favorite movie? Let's have a discussion about what is the best movie and why. How do we judge that? Is it based on Oscar nominations? Is it based on ticket sales? See, those are things that we can actually engage in and discuss and debate. We got to find places where there can be productive, effective communication and conversation. And it might not always be on the subjective, at least not originally. But if we can open up lines of conversation on the objective issue, you know, how many guns should be allowed in the United States? What is the number? Well, how many people are there? How many gun owners are there? How many weapons does each individual need? These are things that we can have discussions on, okay? You know, time for this, we're gonna skip right through that one right here. When we frame our argument, we have opportunities to frame our arguments in either negative form or positive form. And over here, I've got some slides and some examples that discuss some negative answers that can be given when you present your position with regard to the Middle East conflict, okay? But I can word these in a very different manner. I can, instead of focusing on the negative answers, talking about how bad the other side is I can present positive arguments about my side, okay? And here are some facts that I've relied on when debating the Middle East conflict, is talking about the fact that Arabs in Israel have equal voting rights, okay? Number one, it's positive. It's not a negative statement towards the other side that's arguing. And number two, it's something that cannot be disputed. There's actual factual basis to it, okay? Israel is one of the few places in the Middle East where Arab women may vote. Now, if you don't believe that Arab women should vote, that's a different conversation that we need to have, okay? But these are positive statements that exist that you can use in order to make your arguments, okay? Some of these I just absolutely love. The number of Israeli Arab PhD candidates has doubled from this study in the last 10 years, from 2008 to 2018. 40% of those are studying engineering and natural sciences at the University of Haifa. These are facts and figures that support a position that can be incredibly helpful to your argument. Anytime you get the opportunity to use the other side's sources to your benefit, I encourage you to be able to do that. Here's a couple of quotes that you might want to put into your sort of your back of your brain that come from both Anwar Sadat and Yasser Arafat.
Hey, Rob.
Yes, ma'am.
So we are at 1 o'clock. I'm not worried about that. I don't want you to worry about it. I'm going to say if there's anybody that needed to leave at 1 o'clock, please feel free to do that. But don't feel like you can't get through your information, because I'm sure that we're going to be fine for another, 15 to 30 minutes if you needed to. So whatever you need.
And I appreciate that. Again, I'm going to make sure, again, this whole presentation that it's available, that everybody has a chance to look at this. I do want to, if I'm going to take another 10, 15 minutes, I want to spend it over here dealing with what happens when you feel that somebody's coming after you, okay? I want to make sure that everybody understands the idea of alternatives versus options. Alternatives are things that we can do on our own, that we don't need help or assistance on. Options are things that require agreement from somebody else. So a very simple example of that is I'm thirsty, okay? My alternatives, I can get a glass of water. I don't need anybody's help or assistance to do that. I can go to the store and buy myself a soda, a Gatorade, whatever it might be. If, however, I don't have those alternatives available because right now I'm committed to do this presentation, it would be embarrassing and frustrating for me to get up right now to go get a glass of water. I have to either rely on alternatives I thought of ahead of time, i.e. having my beverage, okay? Or I'm going to be left with options. I need somebody's help at this moment. Can you get me a glass of water? Can you pick up something for me to drink, okay? Now, let's talk about what happens when we don't have alternatives or options, okay? If you are a child, a small child, and you say, I want ice cream, okay? What can I do? Well, I can't exercise alternatives, okay? I don't have the ability to drive to the store on my own and pick up ice cream. I don't have the dexterity to climb up to the freezer to get the ice cream out, to scoop it and put together my own bowl of ice cream. And what if the options I have don't fulfill my interests as well? Mom, Dad, can I have some ice cream? No. Well, if I don't have alternatives and I don't have options, I lack control. And when I lack control, I'm going to act in a certain way. Okay? I'm going to get angry. I'm going to make threats. I'm going to try to go around that person. I'm going to place blame. These are things that have absolutely nothing to do with age or maturity. They're all to control and to power. Okay? So that when we have neither power or control, we look for ways to challenge the other side and fight that are based on emotions, that are based on attacks, that are based on anything but logic. Okay? And so what do we do when we are facing someone like that? Okay? Well, here's some ideas. Okay? When we see people that are in extreme positions as far as using tactics, that they've given up on, like I said, power and control for the situation, it doesn't mean that we can't continue talking to them. We just have to change a little bit, okay? I have an acronym over here that goes through different tactics that you're going to see on a regular basis, okay? And you can read through this list. You know, some of them are, you know, simple as corporate approval, okay? I'd like to help you with this situation, but I can't. Or you're not able to help me. Perhaps I should go talk to somebody else. It may be something that's as serious as system breakdown, okay? I'm simply going to avoid having this conversation any further. I'm going to unplug my computer. I'm going to disconnect my phone. I'm going to unfriend you, okay? I'm going to propose that there are different ways to deal with this. First of all, understand that it is a tactic, where it's coming from, and why it's there, okay? If I am running late to this meeting that I'm attending, okay? I'm running late to work. There are different places where I can put the blame for that. I can put it on myself. I didn't get up on time. That's on me. I didn't plan out ahead of time. I should have left more time for myself to get there. And I take responsibility for that. I can also put the responsibility on a third party, okay? Getting that traffic or construction, all right? That's the reason I'm late to work. It's got nothing to do with me or my thought process. It's the slow car that was in front of me. It's the traffic jam. Or I can go on the attack. And these are the ones that we have to watch out for, where somebody says, yeah, well, yeah, I know I was late, but why do you care? I get my work done all the time. You don't. And by the way, you're late half the time anyways, okay? When we see people do that, that's where we need to watch how we respond to these things, okay? Here's the way that we can respond. And by the way, this video that I've got cited below here is actually a video on bullying. It's created by Brooks Gibbs. Fantastic speaker. The entire video is less than 5 minutes. I highly, highly recommend it. Even though it deals with high school bullying, the ideas behind it and the process and the concepts that go with it apply really to any type of conflict conversation. So if you get a chance, please go take a look at this video. It's absolutely wonderful. But if you find yourself in that situation, don't lower yourself to their level. Remain calm, kill them with kindness, okay? And remember that your sense of happiness and identity is not wrapped up in what they think, all right? If a party is using attacks towards you, you're a snowflake, you're a socialist, or you're, prejudiced, whatever it might be, okay? Take a minute, think about what they say, why they're saying it, because they've ran out of control of the situation. They've lost all their ammunition. They don't have facts and figures that properly respond to what you're saying. If you want to still engage them in conversation, get them to return back to that main objective, okay? This is an example of a exchange that I had with an individual dealing with Israel issues online, and how all this ties together, how all of this can play out. Party posted that Trump protects Israel while Biden seeks to destroy it. Simply posted, I disagree. Immediate response, you're clearly a liberal snowflake and or a self-hating Jew. Now, where's my response to that? I can either get down in the muck with them and call them a bunch of names, or I can stay calm and focus my goal. You seem very passionate about this subject. Help me to understand your position. What did Trump do to protect Israel? What did Biden do to destroy Israel? He gave me a quote. He gave me an article connection or a link. And here's what the article said. By 70% to 13%, Israelis say Trump is better for Israel than Biden. Also says 42% of Israeli Jews believe the U.S.-Israel bond will weaken if Biden is elected. Only 7% believe it'll get better. Learn something instead of just regurgitating the liberal media. Well, I took him at his word. I learned something. I read through that article. I picked apart that article. I went and looked at the actual study that went with it. And then I shared that information back with them. I found it very interesting. Thank you for sharing the source. It does say 42% of Jews believe the U.S.-Israel bond will weaken if Biden is elected. I'm sorry, I've got that backwards over there in my slides now. I see that. Basically, yeah, no, I got that right. 42% believe it'll weaken. But if you look at the survey, there's only 3 answers that are allowed. Weaken, worsen, improve, or stay the same. And so when you actually put all those statistics together, the majority of Israelis, 58%, actually believe the U.S.-Israel bond will either improve or stay the same. Thoughts? You think you are so smart. Well, I actually do, but I was using your information. Mindlessly following the liberal agenda. Biden will destroy Israel. Hope you never have to return to a Jewish state that won't exist. I really appreciate your support for Israel and also showing me new information. I went back and read the article you discussed above. Breakdown of the article also says 82% of Israelis who identify as right-wing support Trump. Less than 50% of the centrist and left-wing Israelis supported Trump. Trump has very significant support from non-Jewish Israelis, both Arab and Christian. So how did you come up with your position? Is it that you contend that only right-wing Jewish Israel citizens and non-Jewish Israel citizens care about Israel? Please explain to me. What a waste of time. Last message I got from him was clearly brainwashed and following the herds of sheep that will lead to the destruction of Israel and America. Now, this was a cyber troll that I was dealing with on this, but I left the conversation being very positive. Perhaps didn't convince or persuade this person of something, but what I didn't put over here was several responses that came from other parties and other individuals that said, thank you for sharing that information. I would have never looked at that article. Very informative. So sometimes we're engaging in that conversation, like I said, not to persuade the person we're talking directly with, but instead to influence and affect the people that are listening in silently. Okay. I apologize. I know that, especially at the end, I felt a little bit hurried. Love to take questions, love to talk about this a little bit further. just realized as I was going through this, I have a whole other set of slides that didn't make it into this presentation. I've got literally, when I teach these classes on conflict resolution, about 60 hours worth of material that I normally use in PowerPoint presentation, and what I pick from and what I don't pick from. I wanted to share the question that had come up earlier about how we deal with that thought process, and how people, you know, we don't discuss it, as Dan brought up, you know, we don't understand the terms that we're using and where that comes from, why that happens. Just like that article from the Israeli Times, if you look at different articles, both from the left media and the right media, okay, there is so much misinterpretation, misrepresentation of facts that goes on, and opinions, the things that are truly editorials that are presented as factual and as news, that make it into what we now consider mainstream media. And there's a reason for that. It's simply that sensationalism draws viewership. So the more tantalizing we make it, the more exciting, the more controversial, the more likely people are going to take a look at it. What happens is that people read those, they don't go into the articles, they just look at the headlines, or they consider the source. And if they generally agree with that source, they take it at face value, which has caused their statements, maybe not their philosophy, maybe not their beliefs, but their statements to seem more extreme. And that's where I think we can make some headway. I think that's where potentially we have a chance to say, look, I know you love listening to so-and-so, and that their positions and their statements that you believe. Let's look at that article some more. Would you consider looking at this other article? Would you consider comparing these stats and looking at this data? Okay. And if you're asking them to do that, be willing to do it yourself.
Rob, this is Lori. So,
Yes.
So many of these things, I mean, I can see where you could have used 60 hours to, you know, go through this, because so much of what you're talking about, like I know for me, is behavioral change, you know, like the stop and think, and, you know, how to, you know, get to a position of compromise instead of just shutting down. All of that takes not only practice, but a desire. And I mean, this is a great group to talk to, because we are all, most of us, I have to say, you know, are always trying to improve ourselves. And I bet you that a lot of us find ourselves in positions right now where we are not in agreement with our neighbors and things like that. And again, I'm just going to go back to it takes practice to do that. And I don't know if it's not really a question, but an observation.
No, you're 100% correct. All of these things that we look at, all these things that we discussed today, and so much more, relies on first knowing that it exists, and then B, practicing it. Yeah, I make the comparison often to learning a foreign language.
Oh, now you're on there.
You know, the first time that you try to speak Italian, it's going to be very clunky. And so it takes a lot of practice, it takes a lot of studying, it takes a lot of understanding. Same thing here. Learning how to talk to somebody who thinks a different way, who processes information a different way. And again, like I said, so much more information that we could have gotten into. I do an entire presentation on how reaching people either by them being visual, auditory, or kinesthetic in the way they understand information. That simple concept, and being able to present something in a way that is most appealing and easiest for them to process. You know, like I said, 12 million bits of information coming in, only 50 being processed every second. You want to make sure the information that you're presenting is put in a form that is easiest for them to process, so it gets cut ahead in line, for lack of a better term. Those are things that just take years and years and years of practice. And again, I appreciate the introduction that my mother gave me. I do not consider myself an expert in this subject matter. I've been studying it for over 25 years. I've been teaching it for that long. But I myself have still only hit the tip of the iceberg. And I think you can spend lifetimes going through this and still finding other ways of how we communicate and work as a society.
Let's see if anybody else has any questions for Rob while we've got him here. While you all are thinking of a question, Rob, I wanted to tell you that there is one slide, I think it's slide 16, how to overcome cognitive biases, which I think I'm going to print off and put on my wall because it says, slow down, identify the goal, process your emotions, recognize all or nothing thinking. That is so valuable to me. So I know I'm walking away with that as something that I want to practice.
Maybe you can send it to all of us. I really like that one too.
Well, and Rob, are you, I'll talk to Rob about sending out the presentation, but we have the recording, which we will have on our YouTube site. And if there's there's nothing else I want to share too before we go. So go ahead, Rob.
No, I didn't mean to go, but yeah, I was going to say absolutely happy to share the entire presentation in PowerPoint, or if you want a particular slide in PDF, I'm happy to pass that information along. The slide that you're mentioning reminds me in elementary school of a test that I took, and the first item on the test said read all of the instructions, and then there was a laundry list of 40 things that you had to do. And the final item on that list was ignore all the instructions other than number 1. And so it's just one of those reminders again that, slow down, take in all the information, be willing to look at other information from different sources, not from a position only of know thy enemy, but also know thyself. Realize that there may be something in there that does make sense and that you agree to, that may change your position ever so slightly.
Thank you.
Rob, this is Sharon. I think for me, the thing that I have the most difficulty with is when I'm directly attacked and I feel like I'm backed up against a wall. What do I say? And usually it's nothing, and thank you for your opinion and leave. But it's created a real problem with friendships.
No, I totally understand that. Please take a look at that video, the one on bullying, because I think that provides a great answer when you have immediate confrontation. One of the easiest things you can do is throw the other party off guard by acknowledging without attacking and responding back. Okay, you feel that way, and I understand that, and it's quite okay actually to tell the party, whether it's online social media
Fuck off.
Conversation,
Right.
you know what? Thank you for your position, giving me a lot to think about. I don't want to say anything that I'm going to regret or that's going to sound misinformed. I want to continue this conversation. Give me a few minutes to get back to you. Give me a few days to get back to you. And that way you can think about how you want to respond to it and also decide how you want to address and deal with that relationship.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think everyone really enjoyed your presentation. I hope that everyone got something from it to utilize in their going forward in this conflictive society that we live in. And we really appreciate everything you presented to us. So thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
And they want you to send us
yes, the
bullet
video. Do you have a link to that, Rob? Handy that you could drop in the chat?
Let me, I'll tell you what, I've got it right here. Let me simply, let me pull it off the slide. Give me 1 second. I will copy and paste it right now into the presentation.
And I also dropped this long note that you may have noticed in the chat, that the Women's Health Protection Act is coming up before the Senate, And I know that we have all been very active in making sure that our senators know how we feel about it. And you girls are the ones that taught me that we have to keep telling them, even if you know that they are diametrically opposed to this, we need to let them know. We want them to hear this. So I'll be sending out a email probably later today or tomorrow. So look for that. It should be as easy as click here and contact your senators. But I'm excited. I shouldn't say excited, but I'm happy that it's at least coming, to a discussion on the Senate floor. So good news. So, well, thank you, everybody. And Rob's going to send me that link, and I'll make sure that we send that out with you guys with the link to the recording.
I apologize. Just got it.
Don't worry about it. I'll just send it out.
Oh, yeah, well, there it is. It's in the chat box now.
Oh, good. So if anybody wants to grab it, it is in the, I don't see it. Oh.
And he just posted it.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I didn't see it either.
I didn't see it.
It just got, I think I might have actually just sent it as a direct. I apologize.
Oh, yeah, because I was going to say, I still don't see it either.
There. I apologize. Let me do that.
Oh, yeah, he probably was responding to Lee.
There.
This
No,
was really great, Rob. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Wow.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
Have
you,
a great-
Rob.
94%.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Bob. Rob.
Here.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Where was your wife today, Rob? Was she? Oh, I'm going to stop the recording now.
Oh, yeah, she watched the recording. She's teaching.